annual conference. This meeting today, by the way, is going to be recorded before I forget to mention that, and it will be shared with all of you afterwards. But so George and I were preparing for the NEASC annual conference. I was presenting on the theme of strategic planning in times of crisis. And as we were going through this, and as I was going through interviews of school leaders around the globe, North America and China mostly, I basically realized that schools don't talk with each other when it comes to the topic of strategy. What really happens, or what the pattern I've seen emerge, is on one hand, schools will either do it themselves, something that we did at Liz American School, or they will hire outside resources, consultants. Niels has had both hats, by the way, that of head of school and as of a consultant. So that is why it's particularly interesting to see how his experience has been. But the reality is that schools don't talk with each other. And so based on that, George and I brainstormed an idea for a roundtable discussion around various themes around strategy. Okay, so that being said, George, would you like to maybe introduce yourself and the panelists? How would that sound to you?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Christoph. So my name is George Edwards. I'm the Chief Accreditation Officer at the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. And as Christoph said, we've been working together since November, I guess, preparing for the annual conference and showcase held by NEASC in December. And this and the previous roundtable discussion are kind of a natural outgrowth of that conference and the presentation that Christoph did then. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you. I do have another commitment at 11, so I may have to jump off before we're done, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation today.
So I'll quickly introduce myself, and then I'll ask Marcus and Craig to give a few lines about who they are and where they are from. So my name is Christoph Ott. I am a board member of Liz American School, and I have been a managing director. I was a managing director, sorry, for at Liz American School for the past 15 years. And currently I am on a sabbatical with an intention of really focusing and taking a deeper dive on the topic of strategy and the teaching of entrepreneurship. As a board member, my intention is to bring back these lessons learned back to the school and share it with the operational team there. Niels?
Thank you, Christoph. Welcome. Pleasure to see you all. Good to see you, Laura. Long time we've met. I'm speaking to you from Zurich, and I'm a management consultant originally, so trained in business, PhD in finance. I came into education through a strategy project, which then I led as head of school for over 6 years at a fellow boarding school in Switzerland. Also strong relations with Lesan, where Christoph and Mark are from. And I'm grateful still for the help you gave us. Afterwards, left to build a new school in Lisbon. And now I'm back in the consulting role, working with educational groups around the world, but also with larger international schools, specifically on the topic of co-creating their future. And so strategic planning.
Okay, thank you very much. Craig, why don't you share with us where you're from and what's your cup of tea these days?
Of course. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Christoph. And thank you also for organizing this endeavor, you and George, because this is really satisfying to be able to actually talk about the work that we're all doing together and doing in vacuum. So kudos to both of you. My name is Craig Gemmell. I've worked in New England boarding schools for almost 35 years. And along the way, got a couple graduate degrees in first in ecology and then environmental studies. And right now I'm president of Brewster Academy and president of BA International. My mandate is to oversee alignment and excellence across a growing network of schools emanating from the shores of Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, and we'll be opening in Madrid, 2 locations in Madrid in 2023, and anticipate having a medium-sized network of schools by 2030 in Europe and the environs. And that's all I'm focusing on right now, and it is immensely strategic and relentlessly interesting. So thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much. In absentia, Markus Frischknecht is a leadership development consultant out of Zurich. Also, our experience with Mark Frederick is that we've worked with him a number of years on leadership development topics within the school, most notably also our co-leadership model of the time. And we had selected him because he was a very value-driven consultant, very human-centric, which was something very important to us at the time. So, you know, again, I'm very sorry that he's not able to be here today, but I will, in the follow-up email, share with you the recording, the resources, the slides, and the contact information of the panelists in case you would like to reach out to them independently. So let's maybe go into the slides that Markus has shared with us. I'll comment on those a little bit. Understand, please, that this is my interpretation of some of the work I have done with Markus, and I'll be adding obviously my little pinch of salt based on the interviews and the homegrown experience we've had in Switzerland. So basically, what I find very fascinating in Markus's approach is, if you could go to the next slide, please, that would be very kind, is that, you know, communication is everything. Literally, communication is the A and the Z of any kind of leadership position, let alone a leadership position who is focusing on change and change management. And basically, when you look at this, you have to look at communication on varying levels of analysis. And when I say level of analysis, I'm talking about one-on-one communication, and then you have a team communication, you have organizational wide communication, and there are different approaches to those three levels. And some of the tools that Markus has been working through with me and my brother, but also I have become very familiar with through a degree I've just completed in coaching and mentoring, is basically impactful communication starts with being very conscious of what's happening within you, conscious of how you are messaging and what you're projecting, and most importantly, conscious of the other person who is speaking to whom you are speaking. And active listening tools, some resources of which I will share with you, or maybe George can put some of those into the chat also, are, you know, they're frightfully uncomplicated in their understanding, but that consciousness that you need to have during their application is what makes it a challenge to really put it into practice. But the goal is to, you know, practice makes perfect. You know, we are all familiar with the 10,000 hour rule. I'm not saying you need 10,000 hours to become a good communicator / active listener, but that awareness is something that the more you have it present, the more effective you become. Next slide, please. So yeah, it's the coordination of behavior. You know, ultimately, during my background, which is engineering, everybody mentioned to me during my studies that at some point, most engineers will end up becoming managers, and anything that was considered a soft skill that is massively frowned upon in the circles I was in, I think it's probably a little bit of a thing in engineering in general, are actually the hard skills of the people that have to lead other people. So I'm a fundamental believer in making those soft skills the center and the core of leadership in an educational setting in school, but not just. And ultimately, what does it boil down to? It boils down to understanding people and being able to coordinate efforts and alignment. Strategy at its essence for me is an alignment of efforts within the context that you are in. Especially in the field we are in, education, it's relatively unlikely that you are going to, you know, reinvent the wheel. It's more about becoming more precise, more focused, better aligned. And because a lot of the magic happens in the classroom, obviously this has to permeate every single level of the organization. And so what Markus says in the next slide is a very powerful visual in my mind. I'm also a visual person, so that speaks to me maybe more than to others. But there are three levels here. It's the you, and you being aware of yourself, of your inner chatter. They call it in the Eastern meditation and religions, the monkey brain, that inside talk that's always happening in the background. And if you're not aware, that inside talk actually is your pilot. You're basically on autopilot, and these thoughts are something that are not necessarily yours, but they are through awareness controllable and understandable. And so that inner awareness is one piece. Then the other piece is how you, as a pawn on that chessboard, are interacting with others. And then there's the framework, which is the context you're in, and the leadership you're showing and the role that you have within the organization. So yeah, the next slide would be perfect. And so this slide I really like, because ultimately it brings it all together really elegantly. It's basically, you know, how can I be the best I can be? Because ultimately, the only thing you really control is yourself and what you put out there. You do not have an impact or a control over what others hear or others perceive. So what is it that I'm feeling? What is it that my needs are? What is it that I need? And this is not said in an egotistical sense. This is not trying to, like, you know, grow your inner narcissist. No, this is growing inner awareness. And making sure that the more you know yourself, one of the big pieces of the puzzle there, the more you're self-aware, the more you're going to be able to be aware of others. And that is where active listening comes in. Some of the tools would be to summarize things and to give back the words of the person in a sense of, here's what I have heard in terms of what you said, is this correct? And it's really this bridge building piece. And then you bring it all together in the interaction. So that bridge building piece is where it really starts coming together. The next slide by Marcus is one that I think needs a bit of explanation. So if we start on the top left corner, you've got obviously a structure, process, and result. But you basically, on a leadership level, have to provide a vision. Basically, that vision, that mission, those values then cascade down into results and strategy and functions. This then gets worked into a team setting, and then you as a person and that zone of autonomy, as there on the slides, is really where you can have an impact. Okay, and that is where you have to be aware of your role professionally, but also the persona that you are in that setting. And that will then guide your thinking and your acting and your feeling, which then cascades back up into interactions in the team and impacting the leadership and the management. And all of these three levels basically create a culture of an organization, of a school, a climate within the team. We at LAS spent an inordinate amount of time in our strategy sessions doing team building to really have that positive, honest, trusting climate where we can hold each other accountable. And as a person, the experience that you're having will, you know, either increase or decrease your energy level, which gets translated into motivation, in other words, basically. Okay. And so, as I said before, focus on what you control. This is what I have learned by working with Marcus, but also on a very personal level. You control. Focus really on that, and then the things around you will start aligning or not. And if they don't, well, then you have to make decisions. But obviously, focus on what you control and put out there the best intentions possible. And basically, out of this, the results will happen. You cannot will, you know, what was it? Steve Jobs was saying that his intention was to put a dent into the universe. Well, it's, you know, it's a very, very ambitious goal, but it starts with you. Okay. And the only thing you can do is you first do that dent in the universe within you, and then you work your way outwards. Okay. And then that last slide here, basically Marcus shared with us. These are basically it's a thought exercise around how you can really start practicing these things. And I think within the framework, what I would like to add here of the discussion we're having today, which the key word is really engagement. It's obviously there's communication and there's community, but engagement is the key. I really think there's a big pitch to be made around helping you yourself, but specifically that middle management. I will call it middle management. It's not a very consecrated term in educational spaces, but it would be along the lines of department heads. It could also be along the line of division heads, depending on the size of the school. And the point is, these are the people, in my opinion, and based on the discussions I've had, you want to invest the most, because you have to do your own work. That's the me, that's that first level. Then the second level is that middle management. Communication is most effective face-to-face, person-to-person. But at the same time, you can't be everywhere at all times as a school leader. So you need to empower the people who are going to be, fighting the good fight and preaching to the choir in your name, not your name, sorry, in the name of what you're trying to achieve. It's not a personal goal. It's always going to be an organizational goal. And that is where coaching and mentoring skills, building up coaching and mentoring skills within the organization, because all these tools of active listening and holding space for another person are actually a natural fit when you're in a coaching space, because it helps you grow people around you. And I think as school leaders, at least that's something I've always taken to heart, is my intention is to grow people around me. I'll literally work myself out of a job so that I can dedicate my energy to where I have most value to add to an organization. And so to then afterwards understand the different stakeholders and that engagement piece, a few tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way. So first of all, look at your stakeholders like an anthropologist. Study your stakeholders, understand your stakeholders, understand their needs, understand their wants, their desires as much as you can, so that you know what piece of information and the framing of the information you need to give them. You don't want to be unauthentic in that communication, but you want to be deliberate and focused in your communication. I think that's the key there. And I think when you're talking about communication, you want to find the right balance between communication, getting input, because the more a person feels they're part of a process, the more buy-in you will get, and that's where the engagement stems from. And you want to celebrate every small step. You want to create a positive momentum, a positive vibe around everything that you're intending to do when you are in a change management setting, because change is scary. We're all happy in our space, in our comfort zone, and getting out of that comfort zone is something that demands energy, and sometimes that's energy that we don't have or don't want to put up. And all of this, importantly, is to do this in an authentic, connected way with yourself. Be authentic. You can't fake it till, yes, you can fake it till you make it, but you have to become it. More importantly, okay? It's not fake it till you make it, it's fake it till you become it, because you can grow yourself and grow your skills around that. So I think this is trying to summarize a little bit my own pieces of the puzzle, and the things that Marcus has wanting to bring to the table. I hope I did him justice. He'll get a recording of this, and he might want to follow up with another email afterwards in case I didn't get things right. But I just wanted to open up the floor maybe to the panelists and to George, and see if anything you resonated with you, or you picked up on that you'd like to add.
Well, Christoph, I would like to underscore two very critical points that you've made. One was explicit and the other was implicit. And the explicit point that you made is the critical role in culture in supporting any kind of strategic initiative. And I with my folks, I use this Peter Drucker quotation: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And we giggle about that, but it evinces a central truth, and that is that there has to be the affective inclination to believe that we can all work together toward audacious goals. And implicit in that is this notion of belief, and the power of kind of faith and possibility. That's what good culture looks like, is the notion that there can be synergies among a group of people and a group of ideas that can result in that group of people doing something really important for their institution and for the broader world. And I think that's incredibly important. Culture is the culture of schools, and the culture of change is probably not particularly well managed. And I learned the hard way back in the day when I first started dealing with broad institutional interventions in a way that was not cognizant of how change made people feel when it was delivered poorly. So that's point number one. Point point number two is it is that you give these wonderful kind of visuals that are operate at the theoretical level, and they make absolute sense to me as someone who has gone through the school of hard knocks to learn how important communication, how centrally important, vitally important communication is to facilitate any kind of organizational change. Again, as a means of shaping a culture of inquiry and a culture of kind of audacious possibilities. So I applaud these conceptual devices, and I think that they fit very well with my hard-earned experience. So thanks for that.
If I may add, I would absolutely agree with what Craig says. I think this is a great summary of the I in the school and also the pitfalls that are there. And I guess if you relate that to strategic planning, what it highlights is that strategic planning is an outcome, but there's so many important things around that, of being an effective team, working together well, discussing the right questions, dealing with conflict, getting people on board and aligning perspectives. And if you don't have that, you can talk strategy, but you will always be at the surface of it. You will never really go into transformation, and you will never have that engagement that you would like to see. And I guess while strategy is already a topic that is new for most education leaders because they come from the educational spectrum, right? I had that in my first semester of economics, and throughout then working in management consulting for a long time. But I think the process is already something that is new, but that adds another dimension that one has to really be aware of. And I would very much also agree, this is something that has to come first. You first have to take care that, I mean, you have the right people on the bus, if you want to quote Jim Collins there, or that the people that you have on the bus, they work well together before you can really enter that discussion of where you want to go and what's your next steps. And I think what I very much like in Marcus's approach is that he also has these small steps that you can take to not just aim for the big workshop and everybody goes home engaged and energized and nothing happens when routines kick in. But what you showed, especially on the last slide, I think this is something I can relate to. Change is incremental. Routines change incrementally. Cultures, as you very well said, Greg, this is something that you really have to work on. You have to embed. That takes time. And it takes these very small steps over and over again, not forgetting what you agreed on to make that change happen.
And I think if I can just add on this, and then Niels, you're going to be presenting your own slides, I believe. So George will have to give him sharing rights. I think the two things I'm hearing right now loud and clear in what you're saying is, it's we're in the people's business, and I'm not saying business in any negative connotation here, but not only are we in the people's business, but the people that we wish to impact through the change are actually our students and our community at large. And the people who are instrumental in impact are actually our teachers, not only, but they're a big chunk of this. And being a teacher means that you're actually flying a plane teaching and building a bike on the side changing. And that is insanely complicated, and it takes some very special skills and structural tweaks to allow that to happen, and cultural tweaks to make it allowable for things to take place. And I think the other last piece I'd like to add here to what you just said, Niels, is something I picked up in one of my interviews, is basically you cannot checkbox your way through strategy. It's not a process. It's a very, very organic, messy thing. It is not a very linear, work your way through from A to Z, checkbox, and then you're done. It's not a task-based thing, basically. So without further ado, unless George, you had anything you'd like to add, I think we can let Niels take over.
Well, let me just add one thing, Christoph. I think, I agree with everything that all of you have said. The one thing that struck me during your presentation of Marcus's material is that what complicates this even more is the fact that we're always dealing with multiple stakeholders. So when we talk about communication, and we talk about the need to communicate to establish the culture, we're not talking about the need to communicate with one or two groups of stakeholders, but with multiple groups of stakeholders. So we've got parents, we've got students, we've got teachers, we've got staff, we've got community members, and that just exponentially complicates the whole idea of communication, because you need to communicate and you need to try to establish culture with each one of those stakeholder groups. So I think that's really important, is that, you know, there is really a broad base of communication and culture building that needs to take place in the change process.
Fantastic. No, I think spot on. I really do think it's culture. Strategy ultimately boils down to culture with a sense of direction. So Niels, why don't you go ahead and walk us through your thoughts? What Niels and I discussed ahead of time is Niels has obviously dealt in various functions as a head of school with boards and with the community, but also as an outside entity with all the various stakeholders. In his consulting work, specifically with Zurich International School, which I believe he's going to mention a little bit throughout his slides. But you know what? Take us through your things, Niels. I'd love to hear it.
Thanks a lot. And George, I guess what you actually said, there was a great introduction, kind of the variety of stakeholders you have to deal with, some of them highly involved and emotionally involved, as we all know. We're talking about the children, my children. That is always or very often you use the image of the different hats you have to put on, particularly if you have parent boards, which are important. And yeah, I want to talk about, for me, strategy is co-creation. It's a process that has this implication of creating energy to drive the school forward. And if you do it well, you create so much momentum that you can build on. If you don't do it, you create lots of papers. And that's what I see also often in accreditation processes. I see great detailed strategic plans that are far away from being put into action. So I think you need both to really make impact. And that's, for me, is, I guess, my driver behind all my work is how do I create the maximum impact? And that works on the one hand side by facilitating dialogue and engaging people for strategy. But now also in a startup that I'm doing, where I'm actually trying to put the process knowledge that you need into toolkits to make them available to people who haven't learned it in a practical form to really guide them through the process. But I'll touch on that. As we talk about strategy, for me, strategy is a core leadership task. That is nothing that should be a consultant task, actually. I typically start with the question, why do you need me? Why is that? Because I think if a leadership team is not able to think about tomorrow, how can they take decisions today? Because all our decisions today impact tomorrow. Also, I think that strategy, its purpose, its goals, I mean, these are the crucial and most core drivers to build high-performing teams, because that's what good teams desire. They desire to see kind of the North Star that they're working towards. So I think also now, if you are in the world that's ever faster changing, if you want to remain really a player on the pitch and don't become the ball that is kicked around, you have to be able to adapt. Adaptive skills, and that's also part of strategy that's very, very important to plan. But first, let's just see, why do we need a consultant in strategic planning processes? And I guess the most common reasons that I've heard when I've pitched or when I've started collaborations is we're short on time. That's basically, we lack resources. We don't know how to do it. We don't have the process knowledge. We lack some relevant skills. And that very often is kind of economic or really analytic skills. You have a team that is not well balanced in perspectives. Stakeholder involvement, kind of who should be in the process and how. I mean, we like to be democratic, but how do we really manage that and keep that in a formal discussion? So about the methods. Unclear responsibilities, who's really in the driving seats, who takes the decisions. It's a governance question that is very often unclear if you really talk about the fundamental goals of the organization. And then I guess a lot relates to what was already mentioned also before. It's issues in the team, the collaboration with the board. So we can't deal with the tension and conflicts. We are challenged to manage change. We have a lot of personal agendas involved that don't have the institution at heart, or very often also we have too much turnover. Now, why are these questions relevant in the beginning? Because I think depending on what your answer is and what the drivers are, you need very different kinds of consultants. And you really need to ask yourself the question, is the guy that's sitting in front of me, if I put myself now in the shoes of a school leader, is that guy really bring me what I need to do it? And what I do in my consultant, I can take very, very different hats. So I can be an expert contributor, focus really on market knowledge that I've built. I can be the observer to make sure that kind of the discussions get aligned. I can enable development by really pushing innovation in the discussion. But most of all, and I guess that is really the key of it, it's about facilitating dialogue. It's about making sure people speak to each other, they listen to each other. I think what you said about active listening, kind of understanding stakeholders in the process, that is really a part that is often neglected because you get too far away from collecting information to kind of trying to work through information and trying to balance and to weigh and value. So this is something that I very, very commonly focus on. So really making sure how is the dialogue around strategy effective. And what I did with this, actually, with Zurich International School, was a project with Lisa Lyle. It had basically two hats. And one thing was bringing the school leadership team and the board together so that they would reach a common understanding. It was about kind of speaking to the stakeholders. What are their fears? What are the needs? What is also their ambitions? And what is their basic understanding of the school? And then on the other hand side, really taking the expert hat with the market knowledge here in the region of Zurich. How is that market changing and how does that affect the organizational structure of an international school? And that was at the key of their strategic challenge. It was an enrollment challenge that everything translated into. And it was really a structural change in the market that they had to get to, but it in the end translated into cultural change. This had to decide, as the first international school here in the Zurich area, they go for a Swiss curriculum program and they go bilingual. They basically build a second program next to the fully international one. And that, of course, is a big cultural shift that comes with a lot of fears and a lot of change challenges that you also already talked about. Now, I think if you go into the discussions around a strategic plan, there's a way to design the process so that you can make all stakeholders heard. I'm absolutely about involving the team. I want them to be part of the discussion because that creates engagement. But I also have seen, because it was the first workshops I ran in schools, to run them very democratically, everybody contributes, it's open end, that I want a moderated bottom-up approach. I always have some moderation. I want some decision-making power coming out of it so that I can make sure that the discussion really runs forward and moves forward. And certain parts of the community that speak the loudest, they're not necessarily the ones that push through the discussion. But if you look at this process, it's, if you're aware with design thinking, this is the double diamond of design thinking. And it has a very clear purpose. Because design thinking is about first opening the context. It's about ideation, creating ideas, bringing everything there is on the table, and then moving into kind of going through this information, really analyzing it, kind of boiling them down to come to conclusions. And for me, that has to work in two stages. So the first thing is to understand where you are. So the left side of the double diamond works towards where does the school really stand? And that involves everybody. You can have discussions with students, you can have discussions with the board, everybody can share their opinion. And through active listening and good conversations, you make also sure that they feel valued and they find themselves later on in the whole analysis that you put together on top of that. And from that understanding, where does our school stand? you move really into ideation about where do we go from here. Because in the end, if we don't tie our strategic plan towards the realities of today and we don't see that threat, how can we get from A to B? We're also very much risking that we are too much up in the cloud and we have too little kind of basing in reality, and we can really make it work. So that is always the second part of the process. And again, it starts with ideation. It starts with bringing all the ideas on the table. It starts with talking about fears and then trying to boil it down. And I think in this boiling down, there's a key element where we often think there's a winning argument. So there's one stakeholder who has the winning argument and they really have a sense. But I think we can solve that by really making sure we create awareness of all the different perspectives that we have to bridge. So I can tie different stakeholder views to the different perspectives. I naturally, I mean, I'm a numbers guy. I work in Excel most of the time. I see trends and patterns and data. That's something that I've been trained to. So if I go on this education and business, I would always come also from a business perspective. And I would ask the question, now, how do we make sure that what the great things we do in education, they also make sense from a business side? Because even if we're not for profit, if we don't generate some reserves, we will not be a sustainable school. So we have to seek that alignment. And that can also, for me, it's a key in the discussions when you move towards kind of boiling down to the key strategic plan that you want to develop, to the measures you take, to prioritizing. You really have to say, okay, how does that relate to today or tomorrow? It's the amount of change. How much is it a board issue or how much is it a leadership view? And it helps you untangle these discussions from I'm a stakeholder and I have an opinion to yes, around the table, we have very many different opinions and they all have valuable views. But only if you kind of manage to find consensus and align these perspectives, then we have an effective strategic plan. If we kind of push the balance too far out in one of these dimensions, it will not be effective. It will be a great hype that at a point will also then make a poof and kind of all the energy is lost. So I guess this for me is the core really to then aim for, I want to use that to develop a strong vision, what we do. But within this development, I want to create this momentum for change. Everybody gets on board because everybody also understands how their perspectives is reflected in the plan that you're developing. How kind of their opinion and their view is appreciated around the table. And that, of course, that has to translate then into goals, strategy, and tactics. So what do you do? When do you do it? How do you run your school development process? And it also has to translate into a wider community buy-in. And I think that's the communication challenge, that once you went through the conversation, you can't just leave all these stakeholders who contributed initially just out of the conversation or just say, now we move forward. But you really have to go back and say, this is why we took these decisions. And you have to be very honest. I mean, if we speak about change and if we speak about kind of maybe reorganizing a whole department throughout the school, kind of eliminating a level in the middle management because we think we have a kind of too strong leadership or administrative allocation of resources in the organization, then we have to be honest about it. We again have to explain why this is something that be, for example, relevant from a business perspective to reach kind of a sustainable model. And I guess that's then also where real leadership teams and leadership skills come in to stand strong for the change you believe in and to make sure that the people who have a harder time dealing with that change, you still try to reach out to them, you try to connect to them, you try to build bridges for them from the old into the new world, but you also tell them clearly there's a moment when the train leaves the station and you guys have to get on the train, or otherwise you're not on the train. And it's fair enough, it's a professional decision, but then we also have to talk about different things because then it's no longer about alignment in the future, but then we look for the best solution, and that's probably not working at the same school or educational institution. I think that is a key point in that. Now, you brought me to something I wanted to bring up, and I think it's really important. It's a key question at the very beginning is your team ready for that? I mean, can you have these discussions? Do you have people on board? Do you have the right skills? Do you have enough resources? I think that's a lot of questions you have to ask before you go into the process. Because I've seen a lot of schools who reach out in the midst of a strategic planning process and say, hey, yeah, now we're going for 3 months. We kind of have a draft of a strategic plan, but we don't really move forward. We got stuck. And you see that these schools really didn't handle these initial questions that I posed well. So they really got stuck, and they only solve that typically by really going back to the beginnings and doing it all over again. And I think that preparation is something that is very, very important.
Niels,
yeah.
if I may just jump in, because first of all, I'm also keeping track of time a little bit, and George has a hard stop at 11, and yes, we had a bit of an issue at the starting point. So, but I think
to tell me that.
Yeah, that's why I'm jumping in. So I think, but what I'm hearing here and what you're saying in Management Kits, which is the startup you co-founded, is similar to one of the things that was given to me at the start of our journey, which was Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, which has the virtue of being extremely simple and extremely clear and extremely applicable, because they you know, if you dig deeper, they give you exercises and everything, and it's all about the team piece. So jumping in here on one hand to add this part to it, but also to make you aware that I think we have to slowly wrap it up so that Craig also gets to add his piece at the end.
No, that's perfect. I think Leoncini, he deals a lot with the trust and really on the personal level. And I think if you identify issues in that sense, you need somebody like Marcus to work with. But there's also a lot of other aspects that you can put in place, and that's what we focus on in Management Kits. Really being a digital toolkit to help you to improve the performance of your team. So do you have enough resources? Do you have all the skills represented? Do you have the right rules in place? Are you creating the right culture? That is basically what we focus on there. But I think to me, and that's independent from Management Kits or no Management Kits, is really the team in question is the first question when you think about strategic planning. Because without the right people and the right mindset, the whole process is likely to go off track somewhere down the road.
And I know that you're no, but also I'll also put in something here also as a transition. You are looking, and this will be something that I'll send out to all the participants and the people on the mailing list, for 5 volunteer schools until April 5th, I think it is, or 15th.
For summers, that's the education roundtable that we're doing.
Yeah. So you will be getting more information around this in the follow-up email about it. You know, there's so much value in what you just said. You know, whether it's in my words and the tools I've seen, whether it's the 5 dysfunctions of a team or the 6 hats perspective toolbox that you can use, where you make an effort of actually empathy, of understanding different perspectives around an issue. Because ultimately, you said it beautifully, a person feeling heard is already more than half of the battle won. Even if you don't agree with what they're going to tell you, as long as they've had a chance to voice their opinion, you're taking their opinion on board. Not mean that you're using it, but at least that you're making sure you've acknowledged it is key. But and I very much appreciate also the clarity of how you've been able to bring this to the table. Craig, why don't you take over from here, if that's all right?
Of course, I will. Let me try to wrap up with some specific experiences relative to communication and strategy, if that makes sense. But before I do so, I just want to reflect on one point that Nils made that I think is incredibly important from a boots on the ground perspective, and that is that the first point he made, which was about you need to make sure you have requisite time. Time is the most important resource in schools. Without requisite time, there is no way for strategy to happen. There's no way for sound communication to happen. And I think that the first strategic act before strategy actually begins, it's very meta, is to find time to do strategy in a way that's sustainable. If lacking that, every strategic initiative will be a failure. And that brings me back 20 years to when I was asked as a fairly young faculty member at a school called